Now, okay, we are ready to begin. So again, welcome to today's COVES webinar, where we are going to focus on data sharing and share outs specifically. We've got a few guest speakers who are going to be doing a phenomenal job of explaining some of the things that they've been working on at their institutions. Before we get going though, I'd like to offer up this opportunity for some of you to share comments about data sharing, either things that you have struggled with a little bit, things you're particularly looking for help around, and maybe we can see if we can address some of those questions, or anything else around data sharing that you're really wondering coming into this conversation. Feel free to use the chat window or participate by audio. We'd love to hear from you.
I'm happy to jump in if you'd like.
That would be great, Jessica. Thanks.
Sure. So I'm Jessica. I work at Science World in Vancouver. We've been in COVES for about a little over a year and a half. And we are approaching budget season right now. And so I'm really interested in figuring out how to use COVES data to help inform our budgets, looking at things like staffing and hours and all sorts of different things. It's a really interesting discussion that we're just diving into right now. So I have nothing really to share in that sense, but I'd love to hear if others have gotten any, just have any useful tips in this regard.
Awesome. Anyone else have really pressing questions coming into this?
Hi, this is Andrea from Museum of Discovery and Science. I have a question in how other institutions respond to the want to use COVES data as benchmarking measures to see specific improvements in experience ratings and things like that. And, you know, say we're going to increase our number by 1 whole point next year or something like that. How do you respond to that request?
That is a great question, and I know that a few of our speakers will be able to talk directly about that, so well played. Okay, we'll keep thinking about the things that are really interesting to you as you think about data sharing or using the COVES data internally. And to kick us off, I'm going to share 2 quick things before turning it over related to data sharing. The first is a promise that I made at the COVES convening at the Aztec conference in Toronto. So if you were with us or heard about it from someone who was with us, I basically said that we were gonna share all the digital assets from this year's aggregate report. All of the beautiful graphs and stuff in here, not so much like the weird pictures, but just the data aspects. So we've got all of those in a zip file ready to be shared with you all. And then I've started a presentation, which is bare bones, but purposefully so. The intention here is to allow all of you to kind of customize this report to make it your own. And I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you see this PowerPoint template. And what we do, and you will have seen this if you've been on either of the last 2 webinars that we've hosted, but we've got some of the overall aggregate findings laid out in this template from all of the institutions that participated, including the summary of the main findings. And I don't need to walk through all the slides, but there's about 14 or 15, including some of the year-to-year comparisons. And then there's just this one slide that you can copy and paste as many times as you want, and using the digital assets that we will release from the report and your own data, you can customize this and enable it to be leveraged so you can put your data right next to some of the findings that we present in the aggregate report. The hope is that you can engage your staff, some of your senior leaders, your data collectors even, around the use of the aggregate report and making it much more personal in terms of the data from your institutions. Let's see if I stop sharing now. Hopefully all of you are familiar or at least comfortable leveraging aspects of the data dashboard that you all have access to download different data visualizations. I say this because one of the most useful tools when you go in there and you play around with your data is not actually downloading JPEGs or picture files of your data in the dashboard, but if you download the CSV extension, that will give you a simple Excel file that has the data particular to that data visualization that you can then make into a graph yourself, and it makes a much nicer display when you populate into PowerPoint or any other data sharing tool. So that's one thing I like to do when I'm sharing internally here at the museum. And then one other example I'm going to share, and Linda, I see you on the call, and I didn't actually get a chance to ask if this was okay, but since it's on the web, I'm gonna go ahead and take the liberty of sharing something that the Bradbury Science Museum has done, which is to create their own internal and external summary of some of their data findings. So this is on the web, you can see the URL up here. But it looks to me like it's a data share out from their COVES findings from their first year of participation, which you can see on the side here. Now, without summarizing everything that's in this little blog, the Bradbury and Linda, I believe, summarized the aspects of their findings that were unique to them, but also surprising. So comparing themselves to the COVES aggregate in ways that their audience was different, in ways that their ratings might be different, and in things that they found were most useful to sharing. You can see these titles, Our Mature Audience. The Bradbury uniquely has a large proportion of adult-only visitors. So there's a number of aspects in here that are really thought-provoking, and you can see that they also share some other contacts from COVES. I like this example because blog posts and tailoring some of your own findings to share internally are one tactic that I know some of you have used. And so with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica, who already participated a little bit, in the hopes that she can talk a little bit more about that as far as data sharing at Science World. And while she's getting that ready, I'm going to go through some of the comments here from questions and other sharings.
Sure, thanks, Ryan. So did you have an idea of something in particular you wanted me to share? Like I can show the departmental dashboards that I made, or there's also those like kind of internal newslettery write-ups that I do.
I thought the newslettery aspect would be a great segue from what I just showed from the Bradbury. So, and I know that that's one thing that you do really well, so I'd love to see that.
Sure. Okay, let me see if I can pull up an example, but I can, in the meantime, just talk about the fact that every month we produce like an internal newsletter called The Globe, and I just pick an aspect of the COVES data that I think is either interesting or that I know is like topical to whatever's going on that month. And then I just write about it. And so it's just a little one-page, just to write up. There's usually a little graphic or something, and I share it internally with all the staff. And I've gotten really, really positive feedback on it. I really enjoy writing, so it was kind of a just, I don't know, we'll see what happens. But yeah, people seem to really like it. So just trying to think if there's a good one to share out. Yeah, they're kind of in a wonky format because they're in our newsletter, but then I put them all on our on like the research and evaluation space in our intranet as well. Okay, so I will. Does it work if I just put it in the chat?
Yeah, if you put it in the chat box, people should be able to access it. And if they can't do it now, they can refer back to it later. And I'll make sure that that gets attached to the webinar recording or some notes feature.
Okay. Oh, I don't know if I can actually, sorry, I was gonna put like a PDF in the chat, but maybe that doesn't make sense.
No, it has to be a link. Or you could share it. You could take over our screens.
Okay.
At the bottom with a share.
I can do that really quickly, I think.
While Jessica's working on the tech, which is super fun, and do you have any questions, Jessica? Oh, there we go.
Did I do it?
I see something.
Okay. So this is just one example. So I call it Dive into COVES, and I do a bit of an explanation of like, what is COVES, and find out more here. Confluence is our intranet. And then this month I did, so we had the world premiere of a film. So I looked at visitors who saw an OmniMax film, and then just talked about what was, just a bit of kind of overall, 17% of our visitors come and see an OmniMax film. And then this was particularly interesting to me. I looked at the motivations to visit Science World separately for people who see an OmniMax and people who don't see an OmniMax, and saw that an educational experience was a little bit more of a motivation for people who are OmniMax visitors, but less so people who want to have fun. Just, say what you will about that. And then I try and ask a bit of a question. So I go into a little bit more detail about who they are. A lot of them are tourists. Are there any of these motivations that surprise you, to try and get people thinking about it? And then do a little pitch at the bottom for, if there's any other things that people want to dig into, let me know, and I'll write about that next month. And so, yeah, like I said, I've gotten really positive feedback from it. It goes to staff across the whole organization, and people just really like getting this like bite-sized data, and feeling a little bit more, just knowing a little bit more about our visitors.
That's amazing. How often do you do that, Jessica?
So it's once a month. That's when our newsletter comes out. It usually only takes, it doesn't take too much time to write it up, but I'm finding now, like I've probably done, been doing it for probably more than a year, and so now I'm starting to kind of get, I feel like everything's starting to converge on like where people come from, whether or not they're members, and like why they came. That kind of explains everything in the data set, I feel like.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that. We may come back to you with your site-specific dashboards, but I'm going to turn it over to Megan now, because I know Megan has done some thinking about sharing internally. So Megan, do you want to go ahead and introduce what your example might be?
Yeah, so at the Science Museum of Minnesota, we have been thinking a lot about our internal sharing recently. I know in the previous webinar, Ryan and Alex showed what we do with the FY19 aggregate report. But what I'm going to show today is kind of two other products that we've used. I'm going to see if I can screen share. Maybe. How do you actually make that happen?
At the bottom, there's the
share
box with the arrow that says share.
All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so to start, what we did this year was we actually did a presentation for anyone in the museum to come to, where we just said, we're gonna go through all of the different types of little analyses that we do with our data. We have a couple of things that we've kind of standardized and done multiple times across our years in COVES, but also, as everyone knows, with COVES, you're able to have those specialized questions. Sometimes people like senior leadership are really interested in the results from those, but how do you actually get that out to everyone else? So we decided just to do, let's do everything in one pot. What do we know from our COVES data? And what was great about this was actually being able to put these different analyses together allowed for some really interesting conversations. We had, while it was open to anyone to come, we did have our CFO in the room, our CEO and president was there. A lot of the directors from different departments were there. So it produced a lot of interesting discussion. And to address Andrea's question, we've had an interesting thing about benchmarking as well. So over the last 3 years, we have full FY data. We have seen this, oh, it looks so nice, progression of our Net Promoter Score increasing. But what that's started to do, and because we have the really large data set, is we started, inspired by the COVES aggregate reports, we started doing disaggregations of our visitors. And let's see here. This slide shows all the ones that we disaggregate by. Typically because the ends get kind of low, we look at overall experience rating instead of net promoter score. And then we look at those 4 other rating statements that we think probably have a larger impact. And what that's done for us is we've been able to actually start having some conversations about what type of institution do we want to be. Other institutions might be experiencing this. We are in an attendance slump right now. So when we looked at, this is, here, I'll do OER instead. This is looking at first-time visitors, so those who said that they had not come at all in the previous year versus people who had come once prior to that current visit. And what we saw was people who are on their first visit tend to be rating us lower. That's consistent with what the COVES aggregate report also shows. So when we then have this conversation about, hey, we see our net promoter score rising over time, but we're actually seeing, oh, my slides are not in good order for this. We're seeing actually over time, so this is fiscal year 18 versus fiscal year, ooh, wrong one. Fiscal year 18 versus fiscal year 19, that gap between first-time visitors and visitors who have come more than once is actually growing. That's allowed us to have this conversation of, if we're able to bring in more first-time visitors, addressing potentially the attendance issue we're looking at, we might see a net promoter score drop. We might see an OER drop because people who return are a self-selecting group. They like you enough to come back. So that's really helped us break through that just benchmarking. Let's always get a higher score. Let's always try to have a higher net promoter score. Break that into, well, what does that mean? If we're wanting to serve maybe visitors who don't normally come to museums, might have, give us lower scores, how big of a gap are we okay with? How do we close that gap so that everyone's having a great experience, while also recognizing that people who are members or people who are return visitors are most likely to give us the highest scores. So that's been this fun conversation that's been happening at our museum recently. In order to actually do those types of analyses, we had to free up some more of our time to actually do the work. So another piece of internal sharing that we've done is we basically created, based off of what was already provided by COVES, an internal dashboard just for our staff. We didn't want people to get bogged down in the comparison to other organizations. So we worked with kind of like an advisory group from across the museum. We had people from exhibits, visitor services, finance, even IT, come and look at the dashboard, talk about what they find useful in the data, and then we reorganized the dashboard based off of those priorities to hopefully be most useful. So we separated out our experience ratings versus our demographic data because we were hearing that some people really care a lot about the experience ratings, other people just care about who's coming. Being able to find that fast would be beneficial for their actual use of the data. SMM initiatives is kind of the catch-all where we've put all of our museum-specific questions. And then we also have this change over time one here where people can really look at those big things like Net Promoter Score, like OER, quarter by quarter for us. The idea here was if we can actually just get the data out there in the way that most people can use, questions like, are members more likely to go to our Omni Theater versus non-members? People can ask that themselves, and there's less pressure on our research team to do these kind of one-off requests. We did have to do a lot of like, hey, here's good data use. Here's a video of how to use the dashboard. But that's worked pretty well so far. I'm gonna stop sharing now.
Megan, is this something that you all created, or did you work with Museum of Science to create that dashboard?
Yeah, so what we did, it was a mix, definitely. What we did at first was we basically copied the institutional dashboard that Alex put together and then turn that into the 4 pages that we ended up with, and did a lot of editing, playing with the widgets when they were in private pages, to get it to the point that we liked it and felt comfortable for our internal audience. At that point, we worked with Alex to actually get it into a form that it could be shared, and worked with Alex and Ryan to also get a secondary login. So we still have our official, we can go in, see the COVES comparison data login, and we have a secondary login that just has those 4 pages that we designed.
And just as a quick note, anyone can replicate and customize their own dashboard pages by clicking the plus sign at the top. And even though I'm using my hands and telling you where things are, I know that's not a helpful visual. But speaking of Alex, who does much more work with the dashboard than I do, he has created some really helpful screen captures of videos on how to interact with the dashboard a little more, to become more dashboard savvy, essentially. And we've started posting these to our YouTube channel, which is also where we post the webinars when we're done with them. I've just put that link in the chat box so you can all access this. All of the videos are very short and topic focused, so adding a page will be part of that. The best part about adding a page, if you customize it in a way that Megan just described, you can PDF that whole thing and share it automatically, right? You can print it, you can email it, you can do whatever you want, but you can customize all those pieces so that it's not the full dashboard that may feel very overwhelming to some people. So thank you so much, Megan. That's really helpful. I know it speaks directly to Andrea's comment about using COVES as a benchmarking tool. I would love to also hear from Carla, if Carla would like to share a few examples from the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. Carla?
Hi, Ryan. Thank you. Yeah, I would like to share a couple of things that OMSI is doing. We share the data usually with twice a year reports, and also we have customized the dashboard. But before we started reporting and creating our institutional questions, we have a group of core team members. We call them the COVES core team members, and they are like from the education, from marketing, guest services, exhibits experience, and the evaluation team, evaluation and research team. So we try to encourage us to think in a theory of action, because we say like, oh, the COVES data can be used for anything, and we usually use that type of data for grant proposals to see how specific exhibits are doing and that kind of stuff. And we wanted like, oh, we want some guiding questions, so we start looking at our practice, what effects like our practices have on visitors, like either positive or negative, in 3 areas in visitors: learning, inclusion, and satisfaction. So we cluster our own institutional questions and the COVES questions around these 3 areas. And I will kind of share right now a little bit the report. This was our first report. Let me see if I can share this. I think I can share this PDF. Okay, let me see if I can. I don't know. Can you see it?
Yep, we can see. You've shared your screen.
What are you seeing right now? You're seeing the agenda.
Nope, I see a
circle.
Yeah, circle with lots of other circles and a visitor in the middle.
Okay, so then this is kind of a report. We use Publisher actually to create a report, and then convert it in PDF. So then this is kind of like about this report. We talk about this report, and like I say, we want to make something visual and represent our theory of action, and then it's like, how do you say? So then we start thinking which are our guiding questions, and then which one we want to do that. So like this circle kind of like looks at our OMSI practices. That includes our value, mission, vision, our strategic priorities. And then we look at the, how do you say, the outcomes that we want to get. Like visitors will report if we have, how do you say, is along the road, like we change our practices, or we bring new programming or offerings we expect reports that we expect visitors that will report that they feel included and connected, satisfied, and inspired. And then the indicators are the data collection. And then we want to learn and improve and then kind of feed into our, how do you say, planning. So that's the idea. And then I will go back to show you a little bit here. So then these are our observations around the three areas. For example, like the inclusion, satisfaction, and learning. For the inclusion, we look a little bit of the demographics, and then we look at our own institutional data, and then compare to the COVES aggregate. And then because OMSI is working right now through the equity and inclusion lens, and we think that that's a priority for us, we always like try to include that. And then we also kind of warn readers that because some sample size are small, in particular from non-traditional demographics or non-traditional visitors, we just mentioned that sometimes, hey, this may be a hint, for example, like in last year report, we noticed that non-white visitors, for example, like we didn't have detractors, for example, but the sample size was small still. But that tells you something, like they were mostly promoted, they were promoters, they were satisfied with the museum. So we think like, hey, we have an opportunity, but this is a hint again. Another thing that I would like to share with you is our dashboard, if it's okay to show you how we are working. Let me see. So this is our institutional kind of dashboard, and then we look at two audiences. We look at the general audience and the $2 Sunday visitors, which are like the first Sundays of every month. We have this $2 admission, so we expect different demographics or different type of visitors during those days. So now I am still finalizing the annual report, our first year with COVES, and we are looking at through those type of visitors and also through non-summer, for example, if you see here, and non-summer for $2, and the other seasons of visitor, school year and summer. So that's what we are looking at. And then we are like plugging it in our report is. Some of the challenges that we have right now, for example, is like these charts are beautiful in the dashboard, but are kind of challenging to copy and paste or just create the data. So then we are kind of preparing right now to, how do you say, we just tailor this with the OMSI colors, but we are like, we're gonna use actually the Excel and wanna create a template. So we're gonna try to automatically feed that for the next year. For example, I anticipate that that's gonna be in, I don't know, in May, around May, we're gonna have our third COVES report. So do you have questions?
I don't have any questions. Those were really good examples. Thanks, Carla.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And so we also have Xin Yi from the Exploratorium has offered to share some examples of internal reporting. Xin Yi?
Hi, everyone, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share about our annual report. So Expo in 2017, we started to like generate annual graphic report for us to share with the marketing team and like a senior leadership team, so that we can discuss about like a strategic research, institutional research plan. And then let me share with here, this one. Okay, so this year we sort of generate this kind of graphic report. So we put out all the data from COVES and did some like analysis on our own part, and then we did some demographics descriptive breakdown by gender, child ages, adult ages, income, the kind of demographic variables. And we also compare how we performed in fiscal year 2019 in fiscal year 2018, and then we marked area where we see improvement, where we see area for further we progress a lot. And then what we all found pretty inspiring and useful is the audio segments section. So but for this audience segment section, this pretty exploratory work, we chose variables that we think might be influencing visitors' demographic, or either like motivation to visit, and then run cluster analysis to break visitors into 4 different segments: tourist adults, tourist families, local adults, and local families. And we do see that family groups perform, like, they generate higher ratings, and they show more interest in seeing more shows and programs. So we have been noticing that we could, like, really tailor our report based upon, like, audience segment, or, like, based upon, like, specific programs. It will be really helpful to the decision-making team to come up with strategic plan for marketing, for institutional research. And I feel like it would be great if we can all share about, like, what kind of variables, what kind of segments, audio segments that would be most useful for certain decision-making through our team. And we also, like, compare adult-only data, because the Expo is not a very child-focused group, and adult is also a very important segment of our audience. And in the Expo, we run Thursday night, which is an adult-only night, to see, and we also run comparison to see, like, how adult-only visitors, how it differ in terms of the time they visit. So we also noticed that for adult-only visitors, if they come on daytime, they usually have lower ratings than those visitors coming through our Thursday night program. So this report sort of provide evidence that our Thursday night program is actually a successful program, and so that it allows us to, like, create a base to promote After Dark membership. So I feel like if we can start to have more conversation about, like, how we break visitors into segments, what kind of cluster analysis would be most useful for strategic planning, it would be very helpful for us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Xinyi. Just out of curiosity, it looks like you're making this report in, like, InDesign, or what software are you using?
Just PowerPoint and Excel.
Okay, so Excel and PowerPoint. Perfect. That's what I really wanted to know. So, you know, being able to leverage your own data and create these custom reports using tools, Microsoft tools that are available on most of our computers, is really interesting to see. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure. Ooh, okay.
There we go. Okay, so we've got one more example. Elisa from the St. Louis Science Center is going to talk about the also famous, is it Opening Minds to Science, right? Yes. All right. Take it away, Elisa.
Okay, so I'll try to do the screen share. I've got 2 monitors, so I'm not quite sure how the screen shares, what the screen share is going to share, but let's see what happens. Oh, I get to pick. Perfect. Share that screen. Okay, so the Opening Minds to Science report is a report that we have been putting out. This is now, we've done it for 6 years now, actually, sharing out a variety of stuff that we do in the Research and Evaluation Department. And in the last couple of years, well, actually mostly in the most recent one, we have shared out COVES data, as, you know, to share out our demographic and information. So what you're looking at is the front cover. And I can actually, I'll put in the chat a link if you want to see it more closely. And so this is a report that is designed for external distribution as well as internal, thinking about our board, potential funders, current funders, things like that. So it has very high level information from our various studies, which you can see sort of outlined here. And the pieces that COVES, we're using COVES data, which I'll just show you quickly, are things from our general audience profile, and then part of this section called Voice of the Visitor. So as I zoom past these screens, so this is sharing out sort of high level data about various demographics of our audience and who's coming on site. And it's a way we've been sharing out this information, like I said, for several years, even before we were doing COVES. When we had our own exit survey, we did something pretty similar. So this page, like I said, is mostly demographics and where people are coming from, repeat visitation, that sort of thing. Then from the COVES data, we're sharing out the reasons for visiting and calling out some differences here at the bottom between family groups and adult-only groups. Some of our specific questions on COVES have to do with which parts of our institution people visit. So that's what's shared out on this page. And then on this page, the left-hand side is stuff from our comment cards, which is separate from COVES. But the right-hand side is where we're sharing out information from our Net Promoter Score and overall experience rating. And this is one place where we actually, for this document, actually call out some of the COVES aggregate data and show some comparisons there. So it's a tool that, while it's primarily geared for an external audience, our staff use it a lot as a quick reference piece. So like I said, I'll post a link in the chat in a sec so you can look at it more slowly if you wish to. But it's something we actually work with our internal design team to do the layout on all of this, but all the graphs are based on stuff that I make originally in Excel, and then I give it to our design team and they make it pretty, because they know what they're doing with graphic design. So that's the quick tour of Opening Minds.
Thank you, Elisa, for sharing all of that. That was really helpful. So what we've just seen from a couple, well, first of all, before I get going, does anyone else have an example that they'd like to screen share or highlight? I know there are other examples out there, so this is certainly not, the universe of reporting that happens or data sharing. And in fact, I want to highlight a couple more examples. So one, although the COSI representatives are here, I know they're not sharing, but if you are on the community of practice, in the last 2 weeks, I believe Rita posted a really nice example of a way she engaged some of her broader team, and Jesse as well, have engaged their broader team in thinking about what COVES is and how it delivers data that it can be useful to planning, to forecasting, to possibly even getting into the budget piece, although I know that wasn't explicitly discussed. But go back to the COP, and essentially what Rita and Jesse did was they invited some of their senior museum leaders into a room for a mini training in which they talked about what COVES is very briefly, had them go through the survey as if they were visitors, and then showed them some relevant data points from that survey experience to talk about ways they could leverage the data in thinking about museum planning and beyond. I really like that example because even though all of the share outs that we just saw were very beautiful, some of those can be resource intensive. And in lieu of that, you might want to engage other people in just the process of COVES as it gets built up at your museum in ways that don't involve a lot of reporting. And that was a really good example. So I was really excited to hear Rita's story from COSI. So I think that's another way that you can think about sharing data internally. It's just by engaging people in the process of COVES. And then speaking explicitly about Andrea's question about using COVES as a benchmark. Although there are no representatives that I can see from my list here from Great Lakes Science Center on the call today, I know that they've done a good job in thinking through ways to use COVES as benchmarks, not just in terms of year-to-year comparisons in ways they talk about their visitors, but also in thinking through some of their relationships and partnerships with external vendors. To my knowledge, they may have even written some COVES benchmarks into some of their contracts with those people. Don't quote me on that, but that's one example of ways COVES data can be used to establish benchmarks for making progress moving forward. In addition to Megan's example of customized dashboarding and the reporting that she's been sharing more broadly with her institution, I know that SMM has done a really good job of monitoring themselves, as Megan shared, not just quarter to quarter, but thinking more broadly, fiscal year to fiscal year. But at one point, they were looking quarter to quarter at some of those experience ratings, like Net Promoter Score and overall experience rating, and thinking about how those differ between different audience groups, whether it was based on race or some other demographic factors. So there's lots of different ways that sharing has been done, but just through this webinar share out so far, I've heard about the aggregate report, the dashboard that everyone has, customized presentations, blog posts or newsletter reporting, customized institutional reports, and then customized dashboards. And I'll just talk very briefly about that last one, customized dashboards. A couple people on this call have paid to get access to a second login to the COVES dashboard so that they can make it their own and share it more broadly. There's two things I want to mention about that. One, this is a great tool if, like we've heard, you don't want to share the full COVES dashboard with everybody at your institution. Maybe it's because there's too much data there. Maybe it's because you don't want to give everyone the power of being able to click around and mess around with the data, and you want to lock things in more securely. But it can be a really good way to get people using the dashboard if you're interested in that. And the second piece of that is the reason that there's an additional fee for that is because COVES pays for the vocalized platform. We have X number of logons, but every additional one costs money. And so that's where the institutions pick up those fees. If you're interested in that, we can absolutely facilitate that, help you think through what the data visualizations would be and who you'd be reporting with, and connect you with some other people who have created their own dashboards. But we've got about 15 minutes left, and I was just hoping to open up the conversation to everyone around questions they still have, things they've been struggling with, or just maybe some specific questions to the presenters themselves about data sharing.
I have a question for Carla. I'm really curious about the COVES group you were talking about. Is that an ongoing group? Is it like if it is ongoing, how often do you meet? I've tried to start some of those more cross-divisional things before, and inevitably it falls into schedule conflicts and things like that. So I'm just curious how you're actually able to keep that momentum going internally.
Hi, Megan. Well, we have in OMSI like a exit visitor survey for 2 years before joining COVES. So then when we were doing the, how do you say, the biannual reporting, we engaged with these groups of cross-departmental teams members. But before we joined COVES, we start talking to them. Hey, we need to have this conversation more guided. If we're gonna create our institutional questions, we wanna actually to see what's gonna be useful for you, because otherwise, and engage you, through this, and then they kind of self-selected, for example, or we appointed them. We need someone from marketing, obviously, because everything, all the communications goes through there. Guest services was key, civics experiences, and educators, for example. So with educators was, how do you say, very exciting, because the person who represents our core team member, she actually engaged with all the educators. And then when we were looking at our questions, she said like, we wanna, how do you say, she created a specific question saying like, oh, we wanna see what, if we improve the experience of the visitors, if they actually approach us, and then if they see a demo. So I can show you that kind of question right now, I think. Let me see you if but she said like, we wanna see what is the effect, or if like, how do you say, more, how do you say, non-diverse or more diverse demographics are engaging with them too. We want to see like if we have to look with equity and inclusion lens, how we do our facilitation and that kind of things. And then for meetings, well, we are on our first year with COVES, but the first 6 months we met like 3-4 times, to be honest, because we were prepping everything, customizing the questions. So I feel like we meet once every quarter, for example. And then we were trying to, through our division, we were trying to push, hey, we don't want to have like well, it's not that we don't want to, but moving the core team member to actually a guest service experience that is much bigger. So COVES is just only one thing that fits, but it's not the driver. Because right now OMSI is in the middle of strategic planning, looking at the campus development. So then, but that idea didn't take so much with them yet. So I think that we're gonna feel with COVES. So we are always thinking, how can we evolve this and make it more useful? And let me see if I can share I wanna share with you the educators, because I feel like those are one of the groups that are very well engaged, and they are actually improving their practices, and monitoring. Actually, they have access to the dashboard. Each of our core team members have access to the full dashboard, and they are looking through those questions. And then every year, we meet at the beginning or before the fiscal year starts, and then we start like, hey, we want to kind of look at the questions and then how we are doing. And then for this second year, we kind of change some questions. Let me see here. I cannot find it, but if anybody has some other questions, while I find that would be great too.
Yeah, this is Sarah Cohn, part of the capacity building team of COVES. I don't have an internal dashboard. I don't have visitors. Actually, we don't have people in our office very often at all. But my question is that a lot of you talked about reports and blog posts, articles, whatnot. And I know that in chatting with Holly and Megan, you know, across the river from me in St. Paul, there are these questions around, you know, sort of whether people are critical consumers of data, if they're going to overstretch, if we give them access to the full dashboard and all the controls. And I'm wondering about the space in between. You know, Jessica, how you at Science World or like others, or Megan, you talked about having sort of open office hours kind of presentation. How do you frame those conversations to move beyond the language that you're willing to share and report about in a written piece, and but to open up discussion and dialogue around it? How do you all facilitate that? Carla, yeah.
I think I can talk to that. So when we were rolling out the online dashboard, we did do like basically office hours, kind of like a professor would do, come bring your questions. But probably the core thing for us was actually having, as much as it hasn't sustained beyond just putting together the online dashboard, having the group of people who helped us put it together. Because what we did with them was we gave them full access to everything that we as like the data managers have access to, and then said, what was useful, where do you think the bound should be? So at one point we were considering even like who, at what level of our organization should volunteers have access to this data? Should we limit the types of filters that people are able to do? And actually working with that group, they were the ones who pushed us to say, have a warning at the top about low ends. Make sure that if anyone wants to report anything external or make a decision based off of the data, they have to check it with you so that, you know, people aren't making gross overestimations and decisions based off of that. But having more room to explore and not kind of putting our own fears onto other people would be best. And that was everyone in the museum except for the research and eval department said that. So for us, actually hearing that and having them go, no, really, we can police ourselves and you just police us for the big things. Police is not a great word, but that idea.
One thing that we did at the Museum of Science, which I've shared with some of you, but not all of you, and I'm recognizing that I should probably share that more broadly, is we created a written, it's an agreement. It's kind of like a memorandum of understanding for anyone that we give dashboard access to, the logon feature for the Museum of Science. It just kind of lays out some bullet points, very similar to what Megan was saying about, you know, if you apply a filter, double check your sample size to make sure that you're looking at sufficient amounts of data. If you're making claims beyond conversations with your colleagues based on these data, you should probably check with someone who's very expert in COVES here at the museum. And a couple other pointers just to make sure that everybody who's using the dashboard said, yes, I agree to do these 4 things to prevent misuse of the data, to try and create that culture of critical consumers of data. And I really liked the example that Jessica showed earlier with the blog post, where rather than saying like, this is the finding, like, I own the data and here's what you should know, she highlighted some of the data features and then asked questions for people to consider. And that's one thing we found really helpful in getting more people to use the data, is asking them how they respond to it or what they think based on their institutional role, which again, I think leads us back to this aspect of critical consumers of data, thinking intelligently about what you're seeing. Okay, so I see some comments in the chat feature. Andrea is wondering if everybody who shared reports would be willing to share those out with the group. And I see that most people are saying yes, and either sharing links or we'll figure out some mechanism for sharing. COVES, again, is moving to this model of we're trying to be more open source, if you will, right? Like sharing more stuff is good. And that gets more people thinking about how to do these types of, not necessarily analyses, but create their own versions of what you're doing. In fact, what I saw from Shinyi at the Exploratorium looked a lot like what the Museum of Science has done in the past, and I love this because we're all getting smarter together and building off of one another's work rather than replicating it. So keep sharing if you can. I feel like I had one more thing to say, but I forgot it. So everyone else, please talk.
I just want to share something that we at OMSI right now are like starting the next 5-year strategic planning, and we are also doing like a brand refresh. So the consultant had the COVES report actually because they want to see at our audiences and our previous visitor reports. So I feel like in addition to, how do you say, to just serving our core team members or specific projects sometimes with some data, is actually feeding well to recognize, okay, who are our audiences and how can we bring or expand actually and be more inclusive or reach out. So yeah, so that's exciting for us actually.
Also, Jessica, this thing is very cool.
Yeah,
this chart thing.
I just made a comment to Sarah, but I meant to send it to Jessica and everyone. If you haven't clicked on Jessica's link yet, definitely check it out. I know SMM and Megan have created their own presentations around like, you know, how to be intelligent with data, but anything that simplifies it is amazing. So we can share some more of those resources. And I remembered what I wanted to say. The first question that came up before starting this whole conversation, Jessica's challenging one around the budget. There's no easy answer here, but I will say that here at the Museum of Science, we have engaged some of our senior leaders in thinking through patterns of experience data layered with some of the operational data specific to attendance, which often, but not always, correlates very strongly with some of our budget and revenue numbers. And the easiest way that we've started doing that is just by graphing things over time. So I don't have any really good examples to share on this webinar, but hopefully we can connect offline and anybody else who's starting to do this. But literally just thinking about discrete points of time, whether they're months, quarters, 6-month periods, depending on how large your samples are, and mapping those to some of your operational data points like attendance or like your budget, you know, either your expenses or your revenues, depending on what's most pressing, is a way to start finding patterns in the data and then thinking about other ways that COVES can complement some of our nuanced understanding of those, let's be honest, much more important metrics when it comes to the senior leaders' points of view. Yeah, this has been a great conversation. I'm sure we could probably talk for like another hour if we just, you know, stopped screen sharing and just started riffing off one another. But I do want to be aware of everyone's time. It's getting close to 2 o'clock Eastern. Are there any final comments or questions about data sharing, whether it's internal or, you know, some of the examples that we've seen today?
I kind of want to know how many places do actually have access to those larger metrics to use and to compare. You know, do your departments control the different pieces? Are they shared across the higher level parts of the organization?
That's a really good question. I know it depends on the institution. Personally, I kind of insert myself into conversations around the data and make sure that we have access to things like attendance. And then I connect with the people in our accounting office to get access to certain numbers. Obviously not our full financials, but just the ones that I think will be helpful in reporting back to our senior leadership. It's not something I have access to on a daily basis. I kind of have to go out of my way to make sure we have it.
Hey Ryan, this is Rita from COSI.
Hi Rita.
Hey, I'm wondering if you don't have already a topic named for next month, could we continue this conversation? Could we talk for another hour in a month after some of us have had a chance to sort of mull this over and talk within our groups?
Yes, absolutely. We have a topic, but it's not set in stone. And if people are really interested in continuing this conversation, we'd be happy to continue it. Because I think that this is a really important one. We felt that this was a good time to share after conference and people had started thinking about reporting, but definitely, we can definitely do that. Okay, so with that said, we've been here a full hour. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to try to go through these notes and make sure that everything's attended to, but basically, you're sharing out some of the resources that we've already started sharing, and then we'll continue this conversation next month or in a future webinar to make sure that we can push ourselves forward a little bit more. Okay, thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.